Hello hockey fans and welcome back to another video. After months of rumours and speculation, the NHL trade deadline will have come and gone in less than 24 hours time. Teams across the league will be locked into their rosters for the rest of the season, and will soon find out if the moves they did or didn't make end up working out for them down the stretch. Now, there have been a few notable deals over the last few days, but with the flat salary cap wreaking havoc on the buyer's market, and with most of the big fish still left in the pond, the next handful of hours will determine whether this year's deadline goes out with a bang, or whether it's remembered as uneventful at best. Since my recent video on trade deadline proposals did so well, and since you guys seem to really enjoy watching me grade your viewer-submitted deals, I figured it was only logical that we make a follow-up video and take a look at another group of offers on the eve of the deadline. That way, we can really get into the spirit of the whole event, and see if any of these potential deals end up becoming a reality over the following day. So without further ado, join me as I grade your trade deadline proposals once again. Before we begin, this video is sponsored by Manscaped. Manscaped are the global leaders in men's below-the-belt grooming, trusted by over 2 million customers worldwide, thanks to their precision-engineered tools that help you take care of what's down there. Now, you've heard me talk about Manscaped's wide variety of high-quality products over the last few months. Whether it's their iconic Lawnmower 3.0, the Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, their various liquid formulations, and even their signature scent cologne, you've seen it all, folks. However, this month I really wanted to highlight the great work that Manscaped have been doing for those who need it most, and how your purchases have helped them to do so. In addition to providing the right tools for the job, Manscaped has partnered with the Testicular Cancer Society in order to spread awareness for men's health and encourage early cancer detection. Together, Manscaped and TCS are committed to providing support for fighters, survivors, and families of those who have been impacted by testicular cancer. And by purchasing Manscaped's products, you are directly helping them to combat the most common form of cancer found in men aged 15 to 35. While we're on the subject, why not give yourself a little look down there once this video is over, and make sure everything is how it should be. It can't hurt to double check, right guys? So if you want to try Manscaped's wide range of high quality products for yourself, play your part in the battle against testicular cancer, and bag yourself a pretty sweet discount, head on over to manscaped.com and use promo code OddManRush20 for 20% off your order plus free shipping. That's manscaped.com and promo code OddManRush20 for 20% off your order plus free shipping. Manscaped, refining the gentleman. But anyway, back to the video. Kicking things off, we have a deal between a Canadian and an American team, as our opening proposal sees the Winnipeg Jets acquire Josh Manson from the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for Sami Niku and a 2021 second-round pick. Josh Manson is a 29-year-old right-hand shot defenseman who has posted 3 points and a +1 in 15 games this season, while being in the penultimate year of a 4-year, $16.4 million contract worth an average annual value of $4.1 million a season. On the flip side, Sami Niku is a 24-year-old left-hand shot defenseman who has gone scoreless and registered a -3 in 6 games this season, while being in the first year of a 2-year, $1.45 million contract worth $725,000 a season. Now, based on either player's performance over the last few years, I think both of these players could really benefit from a fresh start in a new city elsewhere in the league. Josh Manson has really struggled to reach his previous career-high performance over the last 3 seasons, and playing on a rebuilding Anaheim Ducks team during the prime years of his career certainly hasn't helped his chances over the last few seasons. On the flip side of this, Sami Niku has garnered a decent amount of NHL experience during his first few years in the league, but he's been unable to crack the lineup and make a real impact on the Jets roster, despite being considered one of Winnipeg's top prospects for quite a while now. Interestingly though, Manson does have a modified no-trade clause that lets him submit a 12-team no-trade list, so would he have the Winnipeg Jets on this list? We know that Winnipeg isn't the most attractive destination to land in the league, and as an American-born blue liner, he might not be too keen on moving to Western Canada for the foreseeable future. However, the opportunity to play a top 4 role for a contender north of the border might be enough to convince him to either waive his no-trade clause or leave him off their list for the foreseeable future. I mean, getting the chance to play for a contending team for the Stanley Cup sounds a lot better than being with a rebuilding franchise in California, don't you think? I'm going to give this trade a rating of B, as I actually really like this deal. I think both teams would certainly be interested in discussing a trade like this, especially when you consider where each of these organisations currently sit in the cycle of championship contention. Anaheim are looking to pick up prospects, draft picks, and young NHL players with something to prove as their rebuild continues to roll along, while Winnipeg need to shore up their right side on D and add a more experienced blue liner who's reliable in his own zone in order to bolster their playoff push. Throw in the draft pick that's also heading Anaheim's way in this deal, and I think you've got yourself a pretty solid trade here. Nice work whoever sent this, a great one to kick off with. Keep the Anaheim Ducks in mind, folks, as our next proposal sees the Colorado Avalanche acquire forward Ryan Getzloff from Anaheim in exchange for a 2021 third-round pick. Ryan Getzloff is a 35-year-old right-handed centerman who has scored 15 points and a -6 in 36 games so far this year, while being in the final season of an 8-year, $66 million contract worth an average annual value of $8.25 million a season. Now, the idea of Getzloff leaving Anaheim and moving to a contending team for the final few months of his contract certainly makes a lot of sense given Anaheim's in the middle of a rebuild and Colorado are looking to shore up their centre depth for their upcoming playoff run, but I don't think that a third-round pick alone is going to cut it from the Ducks' perspective. Sure, Getzloff is in the twilight years of his career, and he's far from being the player that he once was, but if Anaheim are going to ship off the captain of their roster and retain up to 50% of his salary for the rest of the year in the process, you're gonna have to give up at least one more asset in return. It doesn't have to be a top prospect in your organisation, but a young roster player on your team that hasn't quite hit his stride, or a decent prospect in your pipeline should do the trick alongside the third rounder in this deal, in order to balance things out for either team and make sure that Anaheim gets an equal return. Though the Ducks would be retaining 50% of Getzloff's remaining salary as part of the initial proposal, this trade still might not be possible due to Colorado's current salary cap situation. I mean, as it stands right now, Colorado have less than $500,000 worth of cap space. They would need to free up roughly $4 million for this deal to be made possible, even with the 50% salary retained. Like I said in my last video, if a trade is only made possible due to the team freeing up cap space with another deal, there's far too many variables involved for it to be considered a legitimate deal at this point in time. I'm going to give this trade a C, as I can see what you're going for from Colorado's perspective. They'll want to bolster their centre core for their upcoming playoff run, but the Avalanche currently don't have the cap space for this deal to go through all on its own, and Anaheim should definitely ask for at least one more asset if they're going to ship off their long-term captain, who is still a very productive player on the roster, despite being in the midst of a rebuild. Not a bad proposal though, I do like this idea and concept, but I think with a little bit of changing here and there, you'll get yourself a pretty solid deal that could go ahead come deadline. Next up, we have a familiar face from last video, as this trade sees the Minnesota Wild acquire forward Taylor Hall from the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for defenseman Matt Dumba and a 2021 second-round pick. Hall is of course a 29-year-old left-shooting winger who has registered 19 points and a -21 in 37 games, while being signed to a one-year $8 million contract. On the flip side, Matt Dumba is a 26-year-old right-hand shooting defenseman who has scored 12 points and a +2 in 34 games, while being slap bang in the middle of a 5-year, $30 million contract worth an average annual value of $6 million a season. Now, I gotta be honest here, I don't think Minnesota should ever think about making this deal. I know I said last video that the Buffalo Sabres should be looking to get as much as they can for a guy like Hall, given their dumpster fire of a season this year and then potentially blowing up the entire roster, but I think Minnesota would be giving up too much to truly benefit from this deal, both immediately and in the long run too. Let's be honest here, folks, Minnesota will likely make the playoffs, but they aren't considered a legitimate cup contender this year, are they? Losing Dumba and acquiring Hall really isn't going to change that reality, is it? After all, Dumba has been a solid top 4 D-man for them in the last few seasons. He's a known commodity to the organisation, and he has another 2 years left on his deal after this season is over. And though Hall has put together a decent NHL career for himself, he has struggled all year long while playing in the perpetual mediocrity that is Buffalo, and he could walk away in free agency just a few months after this trade and leave the team with nothing in return. That said, if Minnesota were to trade Dumba, this trade deadline would probably be the best time to do so, as his modified no-trade clause kicks in next season and could make things difficult for them should they wish to move in a different direction later down the line. However, as much as Hall could use a change of scenery, and Minnesota would probably welcome the help on offense, I don't think this trade makes them a better team overall, either right now or several years to come. I'm going to give this trade a D. It seems great from Buffalo's perspective, since they pick up a steady right-hand defenseman that they so desperately need on their back end right now, but it makes so little sense whatsoever from Minnesota's perspective, given how it would impact their entire lineup moving forwards. Sure, they might be interested in adding some extra goal scoring, but giving away one of your top defensemen for a rental who is more likely to walk at the end of the year than re-sign with the team isn't the smartest move for an organisation looking to become a legitimate contender with many of the players that they already have. At least in my opinion anyway. Some of you might disagree with me, but I don't think this is a good move for Minnesota in the long run. We have our first trade including a pair of goalies now, as our next deal sees the Boston Bruins acquire Frederick Anderson from the Toronto Maple Leafs in exchange for Yaroslav Halak and a 2022 third-round pick. Frederick Anderson is a 31-year-old netminder who has posted a 13-8-2 record, a 2.91 goals against average, and a .897 save percentage in 23 games this year, while playing in the final season of a 5-year, $25 million contract worth $5 million a year. On the flip side, Yaroslav Halak is a 35-year-old netminder who has posted a 9-5-3 record, a 2.44 goals against average, and a .910 save percentage in 17 games, while playing on a 1-year, $3.5 million contract, which carries a cap hit of $2.25 million. While this trade makes sense from a contract standpoint, as both players are currently on expiring deals, and while the emergence of Jack Campbell as a legitimate starter for Toronto may have rendered Anderson an expendable asset in the organisation, I'm not sure this trade makes much sense from the Leafs' perspective. After all, why would Toronto trade away a goalie who has stood on his head for the team during the prime years of his career for a netminder in his mid to late 30s? Don't get me wrong, Yaroslav Halak is still a solid goaltender in the NHL and has flourished with the Bruins over the last few seasons, but I feel like he's very much a product of the Bruins system around him, so would he still be able to continue his strong play while being a member of a completely different system in Toronto? I guess you could make the argument that the salary cap space that this trade would free up for Toronto would give the Leafs much more flexibility and the opportunity to bolster elsewhere in their lineup with potentially another trade, but does this deal actually make the Leafs a better team? I don't think it does. Interestingly though, Anderson could stop this deal from coming about, as he does have a modified no-trade clause in which he can submit a 10-team no-trade list. If Boston is included on that list, then things would get a little complicated in trying to pull this deal off. However, with the Leafs fanbase clearly gushing over Jack Campbell, and with Tuukka Rask recently suffering a notable injury, Anderson might be interested in moving to his current team's rival and getting the chance to steal the starting role on another contending team, while also giving Boston some more security in net should Rask be out long term. I'm going to give this trade a C, as the value heading either way seems pretty even, especially when you consider the draft pick that would also be going to Toronto. But other than the salary cap savings, I don't see why Toronto would make this deal, as it doesn't seem to make their team any better. Sure, it's highly likely that Anderson heads to free agency at the end of the year, and the Leafs will probably want to get something in return for him if they have the chance, but is replacing him with a 35-year-old netminder who is very much a product of his current system, and his contract is also expiring at the end of this year, really worth a second-round pick for a team looking to contend for the Cup right now? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but personally, I don't really think it is. You might disagree, but those are my thoughts. Let's keep Boston in mind for our next proposal, as it sees the Bruins acquire Oliver Ekman Larson from the Arizona Coyotes in exchange for a 2021 4th round pick and a 2022 6th round pick. Ekman Larson is a 29-year-old left-handed defenseman who has registered 18 points and a -14 in 31 games this season, and is in the second year of an 8-year, $66 million contract worth an average annual value of $8.25 million a season. It's also worth mentioning that this contract has a full no-movement clause in every year of the deal, so if the Coyotes wish to trade Ekman Larson, they'll need to get him to waive this clause in order for the deal to take place. Now, if I'm completely honest here, folks, I really don't like this trade for either side involved. Yeah, losing Zdeno Chara and Torrey Krug last offseason was obviously a sizable hit to the Bruins' defensive core, which you could argue they still haven't recovered from so far this season, but that's a huge contract for Boston to take on in order to try and make up for that decision. Is this really going to fix the hole in your defensive lineup? I don't think it is, guys. I know Boston were considering Ekman Larson last deadline, and I could imagine his move to New England might revitalise his career somewhat, as he'll get the chance to play for a far more competent organisation than the one he's currently with in Arizona, but is it really the smartest decision for them to take on nearly the entirety of this contract in the long run? Sure, Ekman Larson is still a serviceable defenseman in the league, and his recent performances might have been overshadowed by the struggles that the Arizona Coyotes organisation has felt as a whole, but he is one of the top players on this roster, let's not forget that. You could make the argument that Ekman Larson has directly contributed to this overall mediocrity by not playing well enough. Given that he has taken a clear step back compared to years past, and his contract still has both a lot of term and a lot of money left on it, I feel like Boston would be handcuffing themselves to a deal that already looks pretty questionable and will only get worse as time goes on. Also, I would hope that Arizona would be looking for more than just a 4th and 6th round pick in exchange for their captain, who is still in the prime years of his career. That said, the Coyotes aren't exactly negotiating from a position of strength here, as they are the ones who signed Ekman Larson to this behemoth contract with a full no-movement clause every single year. So to be honest, they might have to take what they're given if they want to free themselves from this deal. I'm going to give this trade a D. As good as Oliver Ekman Larson has been in years past, and it's certainly possible that he has a resurgence if he joins Boston, I don't see why the Bruins would want to take on this terrible contract for the next half a decade of his career. Not only that, you would certainly expect that Arizona would want a lot more than just a couple of late-round draft picks in exchange for the captain of their roster and one of the better players on their team in recent years. I just can't see this working out for either team involved, but I do appreciate the effort. It's nice to have some other names come up in the conversation instead of the usual trade bait that's been mentioned on all of the major networks, you know? So I like the difference, but the trade kind of sucks if you ask me. Penultimately, we have another familiar face from the previous video, as this trade sees the Toronto Maple Leafs acquire Mattias Ekholm from the Nashville Predators in exchange for Timothy Liljegren, a 2021 2nd round pick, and a 2022 5th round pick. Mattias Ekholm is of course a 30-year-old left-shot defenseman who has scored 17 points and a +11 in 34 games this season, while being in the penultimate year of a 6-year, $22.5 million contract worth an average annual value of $3.75 million a season. On the flip side, Timothy Liljegren is a 21-year-old right-hand shot defenseman who has scored 8 points in 12 games with the AHL's Toronto Marlies this year, and he's currently in the 2nd season of his entry-level contract. Now, I gotta say guys, this is probably the most logical deal that I've seen in this entire video. Though the Nashville Predators have gone on a bit of a winning streak as of late, and Ekholm may be off the table if things keep going well for them, the Predators are still considering a retool of their roster moving forwards. And what better way to kick off that retool than by picking up a young NHL caliber defenseman who has played pretty well during his brief stint in the Bigs, but can't seem to crack the Leafs lineup due to their overflowing depth on the back end. Couple that with the pair of draft picks that Nashville would receive as part of this deal, and it seems like a win-win for both teams. After all, Toronto would bolster their blue line for their upcoming cup run with an experienced player who's reliable in his own zone, similar to their free agent acquisition in TJ Brodie, while the Nashville Predators would acquire a player who can be slotted into their lineup almost immediately, while also getting some decent draft picks for the future that they can then either decide to use or trade elsewhere in order to pick up further assets. As great as this deal sounds though, once again, the Leafs' salary cap situation would be the only thing holding this trade back, as they currently have little to no space as things stand. If another trade needs to be made in order for this one to be made possible, it complicates matters a little too much for it to be considered a home run of a deal. I'm going to give this trade a B+, which is the highest grade I've given any of these proposals in the last two videos. I actually really like this deal, and I'd love to give it an A, as the value going either way is pretty spot on, while giving both teams exactly what they're looking for at their respective junctures in the championship cycle, but the Leafs' salary cap situation means it's very difficult for Toronto to actually pull this off as things stand right now. Once again, the Leafs would probably have to make another trade in order to free up the space to bring Ekman on board, and without the guarantee of that happening, this deal still has some question marks around it. That said, I really like this deal for both teams, and I wouldn't be surprised if a similar trade like this was made come tomorrow afternoon. I guess we'll have to wait and see, right guys? And finally, we'll end this video as we started it with a trip to Winnipeg, as this proposal sees the Jets acquire David Savard and a 2021 7th round pick from the Columbus Blue Jackets, in exchange for a 2021 2nd round pick and Skyler Mckenzie. Savard is a 30-year-old right-hand shot defenseman who has registered 6 points and a -19 in 40 games this season, while playing in the final year of a 5-year, $21.2 million contract worth an average annual value of $4.25 million a season. On the flip side of this deal, Skyler Mckenzie is a 23-year-old winger who is signed to an entry-level contract with the team and has scored 8 points in 22 AHL games so far this season. It's also worth mentioning that Skyler Mckenzie is a former 7th round draft pick, so he has really worked his way up the depth chart and made a good impression, folks? Now, I think this trade makes a lot of sense for either team, both in the value heading each way, as well as the pieces that either side are acquiring. With David Savard being considered one of the top trade candidates at this year's deadline, and with Columbus's quick descent from the playoff picture, adding a 2nd round draft pick and a prospect who has worked his way up the depth chart and would probably be a really good choice for a coach like John Tortorella is a pretty good return for a guy who has struggled to be an effective player for your team all year long, and who you may lose for nothing come free agency as he is in the final year of his contract. From Winnipeg's perspective though, similar to the Manson trade, the Jets would shore up their right side on D with another experienced player who may not have produced the best year this season, but a change of scenery and the chance to play for a slightly more forgiving coach than John Tortorella means that he still has time to rebound and become a solid top 4 option once again. I mean, who knows, maybe Savard vastly improves his point scoring totals and his plus-minus rating while playing alongside some pretty strong offensive forwards in Winnipeg. I'm going to give this trade a B, as it provides both teams with exactly what they're looking for at this point in time. Winnipeg get a veteran presence on their back end who could rebound with a change of scenery and once again become a solid top 4 option for his team, whilst Columbus pick up several assets for the future since their chances of making the playoffs this year have nearly passed them by. I think either side would be pretty happy with the return in this deal, given the circumstances with the flat salary cap, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised if a similar deal like this was made before the deadline tomorrow. Will it be these two teams? I don't know for sure, but if a similar trade comes along from a different team, I wouldn't be surprised to see Columbus pull the trigger. And on that note, I'm going to end today's video. That was my second attempt to grade your trade deadline proposals. What do you guys think about these trades? Do you agree with the verdicts that I gave them, or would you have graded them much differently? Let me know in the comments below, I would love to hear what you guys think. But thank you very much for watching guys, I hope you have enjoyed. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share, or watch some of my other videos. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye! A big thank you to Carl Fairbank, Connor B, Drew Fawcett, Houston NG, Jordan Whitehead, Saturn Otaku, Tom from Finland, Twin Sanity Dad and Worthless Pieces for helping support this video via Patreon. If you too want to help support the channel a little bit further and get a shout out at the end of every future video, make sure you head over to patreon.com/oddmanrush and become a patron today.